Good morning. We start a new sermon series today, and today's theme is fan or follower. And we turn to John's Gospel again. That's where we were last Sunday as we celebrated Easter. But now we go back to the third chapter. We were with the third chapter here a while back and dealing with Nicodemus. And I wanted to share with you, Spurgeon had this to say. He said, if we were asked to read to a dying man who did not know the gospel, we should probably select this chapter as the most suitable one for such an occasion. And what is good for a dying man is good for us all. For that is what we are, and how soon we may actually be at the gates of death, none of us can tell. Which is a lot of words to say that there's a lot of meat in this whole chapter. We're only dealing with the first two verses today, but in the rest of the chapter we have probably the words of the scripture that most people could be able to quote, for God so loved the world. We also have the exchange between Nicodemus and Jesus, where Nicodemus either purposely misunderstands or just truly doesn't understand when Jesus said that you had to be born anew. But we're only dealing, as I said, with the first two verses, which I'll read for you now. There was a Pharisee named Nicodemus, a Jewish leader. He came to Jesus at night and said to him, Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher who has come from God, for no one could do these miraculous signs that you do unless God is with him. There was a Pharisee named Nicodemus. In the Pharisees within the Jewish religion were the lawyers, so to speak. They studied the law. The law was considered to contain all that was needed to be in a perfect relationship with God. And there's a lot of truth to that. But the way that it was administered in holding people accountable for all of the minute aspects of the law as it had been interpreted by the Pharisees would gather as a group from time to time, and they would go over the scriptural commands, and then they would sit down and write out explanations of it, so that to try to leave as little to chance as possible. For example, in Scripture there is a law that there is to be no work on the Sabbath. Well, the natural question that flows from that is, what is work? And so the Pharisees had sat down and actually decided what was work and what was not work. One example, and I've used this example before, so bear with me. It was considered work if you were away from home and you had a purse with your money in it. Now consider that the money would have been metal coins. So you're having to carry some weight. So to carry that weight was work. However, you could carry it a certain distance and that wasn't work. And so they sit down that this many steps would be not considered work. What they didn't say, and this is one of the perversions of the law that entered into it, what they didn't say is how many times you could take those steps. And so it evolved to a practice that you would take those prescribed steps, you would set your purse down on the ground, you reach down and pick it up and take those steps again, set your purse down, pick it up, and continue on until you got home. That wasn't work. But if you picked it up and carried it all the way home, that was work. And so that's what the Pharisees had done. There were not a lot of them. It says that there were about 6,000. There were never more than just about 6,000 of them. But Nicodemus was not just a Pharisee, he was also a member of the Sanhedrin, which was a 70-man local court. And one of the descriptions that I found said that this made Nicodemus the modern equivalent of a politician, cleric, and professor all rolled into one. And the interesting thing about this is that and professor. Jesus, Nicodemus comes to Jesus, and he calls him rabbi. And the fact was that Nicodemus, in his own right, as a professor of the law, teacher of the law, was entitled to be called rabbi and would have been addressed as rabbi himself by others as they came to greet him. I just thought that was kind of ironic there. I had not known that about him before. We think of Pharisees today as bad people. The fact of the matter is that they were not all hard-hearted or unreachable. Nicodemus himself, when Jesus was crucified and was buried, Nicodemus provided the materials, the myrrh and a frankincense that was used to put on Jesus' body as he was buried. Another example was Joseph of Arimathea, and he provided the tomb that Jesus was buried in and assisted in that burial. And both of these men opened themselves up to ridicule by standing up and doing this. They were Pharisees. Now, Nicodemus comes to Jesus at night. There are two schools of thought as to why Nicodemus came at night. One doesn't put Nicodemus in a very good light, if you'll pardon the pun there. That is that Nicodemus came because he was afraid to be associated with Jesus, which stands in contrast to his providing the materials to embalm Jesus' body or to prepare it for burial, which he stood up and was recognized there. So did something change? Did he come out of fear and then change where he stood over the time? We don't know. But the other school of thought that is held up there is that if you wanted to have some one-on-one time with a teacher, you would go to them in the nighttime where the other crowds weren't around. And that too is entirely possible given the circumstances that Nicodemus wanted to spend some time discussing matters with Jesus. He truly had questions. And so he comes to him in the nighttime as a way of having that one-on-one time that he could have there. And as you see, as the exchange unfolds there, as you go on past the second verse, Nicodemus got more than he bargained for, I think. If that's the way that he came, is to have that quality time with Jesus, because Jesus puts him on the defensive right away. And Nicodemus has to squirm there as Jesus interacts with him.
Is there any record where Nicodemus attended any of the teaching sessions Jesus had at some of the temples before this time?
There's no scriptural no scriptural documentation that he did. I happen to think that Nicodemus probably was one of those religious leaders that was always in the crowd around Jesus, listening to him. As a member of the Sanhedrin, he certainly would have been aware of the discussions that were taking place there about Jesus and his ministry, and the threats that they Jewish leaders felt that Jesus was to them.
What comes to mind is when Jesus was in, when he was like 12 years old.
Yeah.
In the synagogue, teaching and asking and answering questions that some of the religious leaders didn't know themselves that much about it. So I would have thought Nicodemus might have been in with a group like that that already had previously heard some of the teachings of Jesus at a younger age.
Could very
and
well
was kind of astonished about his knowledge.
could very well have been possible. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, I was agreeing with Roger.
Yeah, that's entirely possible, Roger. And
How old is Nicodemus supposed to be at this time? It doesn't
Don't know.
say. Don't know.
Don't know.
Don't know if he was his senior by double the age or same age as Jesus or whatever.
There's another parallel that when you get over into Acts and we encounter the Apostle Paul. Paul was a Pharisee, and Paul himself said he was using Paul's words, that he was a Pharisee among Pharisees. In other words, Paul held himself up that he was so accomplished in understanding the law that he had no peers in that. And if that's the case, then my mind goes to, did Paul and Nicodemus have a relationship? Again, don't know. Those are questions that we'll never know the answers to, at least not in this life.
He just poses more questions.
Yeah. So the theme of this for this first of the new series is fan or follower. And so the question, I guess, that comes from this scripture, was Nicodemus simply a fan of what Jesus was doing, or was he a follower? I would tend to come down on the side that at this point in time, Nicodemus was a fan, and that as Jesus' ministry unfolded, that he became a follower. Between this point and when Jesus died, that something changed in Nicodemus's life. I know certainly with this exchange that takes place here, and this discussion about new life, new birth, Nicodemus certainly left this encounter with a whole lot to ponder and to contemplate there.
Well, when he, as you asked him as the rabbi, he's putting himself, bringing Jesus to his level, as
Yeah.
calling him rabbi as a teacher also. So he had to know something,
Yeah.
past knowledge that Jesus was capable of teaching what he said he was teaching.
Well, this is a new series of new sermon series that'll take us through to Pentecost, and we'll see where Pastor Don takes us with this during our worship this morning. And I hope that you'll be joining us either online or in person, and may God's blessings be upon you.